We're on section 141, the Olivet Discourse. We're moving on to question number 796 under the subsection, the sign of abomination. The sign of abomination. Whenever you might have read that, or as we look at that, does anybody make a connection where that is in the scripture, what that's about? Okay, Brother Joe. It was in the reading that's assigned in the first question, but go ahead.
Well, just off the top of my head, I was just going to say that's from the book of Daniel.
Exactly. That's what I was looking for. What should be off the top of our heads? We should have that general bit of information. I don't want to say trivia. It's not Bible trivia, but that general bit of information. The abomination of desolation, and especially thinking of Daniel and the Revelation as well, for that matter. And that appears in our first question. So we're moving on to this now. Remember, all these things are happening during the tribulation, and Christ is giving a description of when the temple's being destroyed. And so that's the context of this whole teaching here. So question 796 relates to Daniel 12, verses 10 to 13, and Revelation 13. And the question is, how shall the end of days of the tribulation start? And I'm going to associate that with Matthew 24, verses 15, 21, and 22. Now, you'll notice many times that I don't have the scripture verses maybe necessarily where the answer is going to be found. Other kinds of study guides that I've done, I'll do that. Like if we're doing Book of Romans, I'll say, and we're doing, let's say, chapter 4, and I'll say, I'll have a question, and then it'll have the verse in chapter 4 you're supposed to look in. And why we don't do that, you'll notice by now that why we don't do that in this study guide is because there are several books to look at, and we'd be all over the place, and I wanted to encourage the idea of comparing the different gospel accounts of things. So this is going to be related to Matthew 24, verses 15, 21, and 22, which reads, "When you therefore shall see the abomination of desolation, spoken of by Daniel the prophet, stand in the holy place, whoso readeth, let him understand." Verse 21, "For then shall be great tribulation, such as was not since the beginning of the world, to this time, no, nor ever shall be. And except those days should be shortened, there should no flesh be saved, but for the elect's sake, those days shall be shortened." And I'll mention it here. I know in another question I mentioned it, but the elect here is talking about Israel, for the sake of Israel during the tribulation time. Daniel chapter 12, verses 10 to 13 reads, "Many shall be purified and made white and tried, but the wicked shall do wickedly. None of the wicked shall understand, but the wise shall understand. And from the time that the daily sacrifice shall be taken away, and the abomination that maketh desolate set up, there shall be 1,290 days. Blessed is he that waiteth and cometh to the 1,335 days. But go thou thy way till the end be, for thou shalt rest and stand in thy lot at the end of the days." Now, something you should notice here is the number of the days. It's roughly 3.5 years. 3.5 years. And that actually is a very significant thing, which I will not totally go into all the math. But I say roughly because, prophetically speaking, there are 360 days to the year. Prophetically speaking, 360 days to the year. There is some literature that's out there that has to do with alteration of the Earth's orbit and things like that would it's kind of interesting. What I think is most notable is that they went by a lunar calendar, 12 months, 30 days, and then they would have an intercalary period, which adds on a few days, like we do leap year, okay, something like that. But that if you look at how many degrees there are in a circle, how many degrees are there? Not 365. And the ancients, they were actually very good with their astronomy, not astrology, okay, with their astronomy. And so there's a whole bunch of questions that are related to that, but to have the understanding of prophetic count for the purpose of making prophetic statements. 360 days to the year is used as a calculation. So when you look at the days that are mentioned in Daniel, and you'll see over also in the Revelation, if you use 360 days to the as your standard, then things work out. So we're talking about 3.5 years into the tribulation is when the abomination of desolation is set up. Okay, so Revelation chapter 13, I'm not going to read the entire chapter. That's something that's good for you to definitely read, but it's related to this. Revelation 13, we're about 3.5 years into the tribulation. And I beheld another beast coming up out of the earth, and he had 2 horns like a lamb, and he spake as a dragon, and he exerciseth all the power of the first beast before him, and causeth the earth and them which dwell therein to worship the first beast, whose deadly wound was healed. And he doeth great wonders, so that he maketh fire come down from heaven on the earth in the sight of men, and deceiveth them that dwell on the earth by the means of those miracles which he had power to do in the sight of the beast, saying to them that dwell on the earth, that they should make an image to the beast which had the wound by a sword and did live. And he had power to give life unto the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak and cause that as many as would not worship the image of the beast should be killed. And I see that I am missing a page. No, I'm not. There it is over there. Okay, very good. One of the things that is significant in this is that you have, for the tribulation, the first 3.5 years, you don't see the Antichrist really acting as the Antichrist. He's a political figure that's set up, but as a spiritual leader, having that spiritual power, having the one world worship, the one world economy, that doesn't take place until about 3.5 years into the tribulation time. It's about that time that he evidently gets wounded, and Satan, being the great counterfeiter and imitator of Christ, the being gets this, the Antichrist gets raised up again. He gets wounded. He gets raised up again. Again, imitating Christ, and then comes an even greater sense of tribulation. So, the question then is, how shall the end of the days of the tribulation start? It's the end of the days of the tribulation, or the 3.5 last years. How will they start? It is A, the image of the beast will be empowered to begin a great tribulation. Okay, so let's looking at the false answers. Let's look at C first of all. The world will be enlightened to the point that Jesus will come to take his place at the head of all government. Okay, now this is a reference to, anybody want to venture a guess? We've been referring to it. It begins with the A. Amillennialism. Okay, this is something you want to have hammered into your memory, is amillennialism. Amillennialism says no millennium. They look at the tribulation as non-existent. They think it's all symbolic. And so they think in terms of setting up the kingdom for Christ to step into as the king. We are the opposite of that. We see things failing, and that we're here. We're going to be taken out of the world before the tribulation starts. So we're looking to escape the world. They're looking to consolidate the world. Even if they spiritualize the tribulation, it wouldn't make sense to suggest a mid-tribulation appearance of Christ. It makes no more sense to suggest a mid-tribulation appearance of Christ than a pre-tribulation appearance of Christ. It doesn't make the amillennialist position any stronger to press and squeeze Christ into any other time frame. If they're going to do it at all, then it might as well be at the beginning of the tribulation. So it's not that Christ is going to take his throne at the middle of the tribulation. And he's not going to take it at the beginning of the tribulation either. Okay, it only makes sense to have the rapture and then the tribulation and then the millennial reign. Okay, for B, the rapture will occur. Now, the reason I put that in there is because some people used to believe in a mid-tribulation rapture at this point. Now they make it a sense of a pre-wrath rapture, which is not necessarily at the beginning of the last 3.5 years. So some today teach a modern version of the mid-trib rapture, to suggest that Christ will come after the great tribulation occurs and before the wrath of the Lord toward the end of the tribulation. That God is going to have an even greater wrath that's going to appear at the end of the tribulation. So according to them, the Lord's wrath at the end of the tribulation is called the day of the Lord. That's what they like to call the day of the Lord. The day of the Lord, we've talked about this on other occasions, we want to remember, is a reference to either the entire scope of the end times, starting with the rapture on to the end of the millennium, or it could be a reference to any part of the end times. It could be a piece of it. It could be the actual appearing of Christ at the second coming. So the day of the Lord could refer to any of those things. This 3.5 year period is not the marking of Christ coming in the rapture. Okay, so C, there will be a marking point at the middle of the tribulation, according to Daniel 12:11 and 12, when the Antichrist is going to be empowered to be worshipped. So that's what Christ is talking about, the abomination of desolation. He says, watch for that. So Christ is giving sort of a scope of what's going to happen. It's like a mini book of Revelation that he's giving in Matthew 24. Okay, question 797. What should the people of God do at this point? And this is going to be based on Matthew 24, verses 16 to 18. Then let them which be in Judea flee into the mountains. Let him which is on the housetop not come down to take anything out of his house, neither let him which is in the field return back to take his clothes. So the answer is C, to flee as the Antichrist makes war against them. Okay, well, renouncing one's faith, as in B, has occurred throughout Christian history. Yes, Miss Nancy.
Yeah, just to clarify, and just in case anyone is listening and is not familiar with the order of things, these would be people who became saved during the tribulation.
Right.
So they are the ones fleeing to take cover as the Antichrist pursues them, because the Bible is specific that if anybody takes the mark, they're lost.
Yes.
So not to cooperate with the Antichrist's world system.
Right. And to add on to that, nobody should ever think that, well, when the rapture happens, then they'll believe if they see that. The trouble is, if they know that much, they've heard the gospel, they're going to be caused to believe a strong delusion. So evidently, as the ones that Nancy's pointing out that are going to get saved, there are those that are going to get saved. They'll be ones who never really heard the gospel, that they should be deceived. Now, not that they're going to necessarily get saved, but there's the ones who have the chance. And as she said, these are the ones that are going to be fleeing from that time. Okay, so, but if you look back in history, people at times of persecution have renounced their faith. And so, no, never were we supposed to do that. Now, for A, hanging out and trying to cope, well, trying to cope might sound better. Like, for instance, we don't encourage people to go out into Christian communes. We don't encourage people to hide away from society. We don't encourage people to try to be so separate from society that they don't ever have any real contact. No, we're supposed to go into the world in order to witness to people and to be there for them. And so hanging out and trying to cope would ordinarily be good advice to do. Okay, but the advice here is that there is no shame in fleeing at that time. There comes a point where escape is the right thing to do, and when you've got the Antichrist coming after you, that's a good point. That's a good time to actually do fleeing. Other times, when we think of retreats, sometimes people think of retreats as a thing you do because you've been beaten. No, sometimes you retreat in order to regroup and make a new attack. As retreats are not necessarily defeats. 798, what will happen at the end of the time of abomination. And this is related to Luke 21, verses 23 to 24. But woe unto them that are with child, and to them that give suck in those days, for there shall be great distress in the land, and wrath upon this people. They shall fall by the edge of the sword, and shall be led away captive into all nations. And Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles, until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled. So the answer is B, the end of the times of the Gentiles. Okay. Look at C, the success of a communist order. Okay. The order that the Antichrist is going to have is not going to be communism. It is not going to be communism. Communism is only a distraction to pave the way for the Antichrist. Now, we look at the problems of why we fuss about Marxism being so prevalent in America right now and how it's being presented. Marxism itself is not the problem, because Marxism itself cannot succeed. A communist collective is not able to succeed. What it does is it paves the way for a totalitarian society. It paves the way for a dictator. Now, it's not the only way to pave the way for a dictator. You could have all kinds of things pave the way for a dictator. You could have a military coup. That could pave the way for a dictator. It doesn't have to come by way of communism. It could actually also come by democracy. Democracy. We want to remember, we do not have a democracy. We have a republic. Constitutional republic. A pure democracy. There's another word for that that's not as nice. It is called mob rule. Mob rule. And so if you did everything by vote, you had the majority, okay, that's when you'd have racism really take place. Okay? Pure democracy will give you racism, because then the one group will vote for itself. Okay, all people with brown eyes vote for the blue-eyed people to whatever. Okay, poor blue-eyed people. Wait, I'm blue-eyed. Okay, I'm a victim. Okay, so that's another way to vote for and put into place a demagogue who would be a dictator. So what we're seeing with the Marxism is interesting all by itself. It's a danger all by itself. But if you ever got to have actually communism, if you actually got it in place, it'll work just as well as it ever has. In other words, it doesn't work at all. So it's just a distraction. So there's not going to be the success of a communist order. Brother Joe.
Yeah, I think as we've seen with all these mandates, another way to maybe incrementalism towards totalitarianism is fear, especially with all these medical mandates that really don't have a lot of support, and there's so much conflicting information out there, and people are just, they're just afraid, and they will almost to the point where they will just do whatever people tell them that they need to do to be able to live.
Yeah, and which is a lot of demagoguery that's involved in order to achieve that. Okay, so for A, the failure of a communist order is not going to mean the triumph of Western civilization. Western civilization has fostered the success of pluralism, but it has only been able to stave off the inevitable. The inevitable has been the failure of this dispensation. Okay? You can't stave off the failure of this dispensation. Each dispensation ends in failure of man. With the increase of power and responsibility of each dispensation, man demonstrates that he is not able to be faithful to God. And so in this final dispensation, man is going to prove himself incapable of building the kingdom of God, which is quite the opposite expectation of the non-dispensational amillennialists. The only way there can be true success dispensationally is when Jesus appears in his second coming to usher in the millennium. So that's when you can have finally a success in government. Okay, but all we've had here with Western civilization, I just use that as a very broad term, to talk about the freedoms that and liberty that has well established itself in the Western tradition of history. All of this that we've got, this is not the most ideal thing. This is about as ideal as we can get. Okay, granting freedom and liberty so that pluralism can exist. But true, perfect government will only take place when Jesus comes back. Okay, so B, the times of the Gentiles has been described by the commentators as from the time of Nebuchadnezzar in Daniel chapter 2, where you have the kingdoms that are set up that Daniel interprets the visions for, until the end of the tribulation. It's understood as the domination of the Gentiles over that region. So the Gentiles from the time of Nebuchadnezzar had that domination and were essentially running things to that time. That's going to end at the end of the tribulation when Israel gets restored. Okay, question 799. What shall the coming of the Son of Man, Christ, be like? We're going to base this on Matthew 24, verses 23 to 28. Then if any man shall say unto you, Lo, here is Christ, or there, believe it not. For there shall arise false Christs and false prophets, and shall show great signs and wonders, insomuch that if it were possible they should deceive the very elect. Behold, I have told you before, wherefore, if they shall say unto you, Behold, he is in the desert, go not forth. Behold, he is in the secret chambers, believe it not. For as the lightning cometh out of the east, and shineth even into the west, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. For wheresoever the carcass is, there will the eagles be gathered together. So the answer is, it is A, as lightning that shines from the east to the west. When you look at B, okay, it's false because, no, he's not going to appear just anywhere. He could appear anywhere out in the desert at the head of a government as a military leader. No, there's only one way for him to come. Okay. This reminds us of how different ethnic groups portray Christ as a representation of their ethnicity. Okay. Have you ever seen an Oriental Jesus pictured? Okay, a black Jesus. How about Jesus with blonde hair and blue eyes? They're all wrong. Okay, all of them. Okay, he was Jewish. It was Jewish. Now, we understand why people are doing that. You know, what the theory behind that is, the artistic message is that Christ is there for all peoples, okay? Different kinds of people groups. And that's why we're called People's Baptist Church, okay? It's not people apostrophe S, it's peoples with no apostrophe. And so it's talking about how we're made up of many different kind of peoples. It was nice to see a Sierra Leonean couple. First time we had West Africans, I think, in the church. We had East Africans, first time West Africans. And one lady came a couple of weeks ago from London. Okay, and so it's very, very interesting. You get different peoples, okay? But and that's a nice idea, but theologically, it's blasphemy. Why? Because Christ had to come from the tribe of David. He had to come from, be the son of David from the tribe of Judah, and in order to fulfill prophecy. So if you depict him any other way, it's actually theologically incorrect. He had to fulfill Scripture. To depict him some other way is to deny the Bible, and so you don't want to do that. But Christ doesn't come just anywhere. Well, they're going to look for him coming from all kinds of situations in the time of the tribulation. Okay, for C, he will come working miracles to prove that he's the Christ. Well, Jesus doesn't really even need to have done that the first time around. That was Christ being gracious to us. I mean, Christ could have appeared in glory and could have just stood there in front of everybody and said, "Hi, I'm Jesus. Okay, I'm the Christ." He could have done that. But no, all of this is because of the grace of God to come the way he did. Why? is it God's grace? Well, it extends back into the Old Testament times. We want to remember, according to Romans chapter 3 and chapter 2, that the Jews were set up as a people by the grace of God in order to establish a record of who the Christ was going to be, a miraculous record. And so God was giving all kinds of proof that people could have in order to recognize who Jesus was. And it was gracious because, again, God could have just shouted out of heaven, but knowing that people will resist even if God were to appear, knowing that people are stupid like that, God is very gracious to really set up a way to prove his existence. How do I know people are stupid like that? Stop and think about what happened as the Jews were coming out of Egypt. If you had the sea open up in front of you, do you think you would get a clue? Okay. If you had a fiery pillar of fire at night leading the way and standing between you and the Egyptians, and if you had a pillar of cloud, do you suppose then that you might have gotten a clue that there was something big out there that you had to listen to? If you got into a Mount Sinai and you heard the thunderings and you saw the lightnings and everything like that taking place, and then a voice speaking out of the thickness of the cloud to you, maybe then, I mean, if the first two clues hadn't gotten to you, maybe then. You see, what did they do as soon as Moses went up to the mountain? They all said, "Oh, Aaron, make us a golden calf." And they all took their jewelry, threw it into the fire, and out came the calf, and they started making mischief, which has to do with the idea of immoral behavior, dancing around the calf. I just don't get it. I just don't get it. And so God, in his grace, set up a record so that we would have something so solid to go on for our day to be able to identify who Christ was. Okay, so the miracles, they didn't have to be done. But when he comes back again, he doesn't need the miracles. Not that he needed them before, but no, now it's time for him to come in judgment. Okay, so for A, as lightning that shines from the east to the west. Well, God's work in some ways has moved from the east to the west. The growth of Christian civilization has moved from the east to the west. The rising and setting of the sun is from the east to the west. Israel's entry into the promised land. They were not allowed to come up from the south. They had to go around and approach Israel, the promised land, from the east. And then the arrival of Christ is going to be coming out of the east. But what I think is especially noteworthy here is his arrival being compared to lightning. I think the thing that's really fantastic about this is just how fast it's going to be, how powerful it's going to be, how it's going to just flash across the world in a flash of an eye to be able to receive his people. Okay. Then we move on to question number 800, and we'll cover question number 800 and 801 also tonight. The signs in the heavens that are going to be there at that time. Okay, so question 800, what further description is given to the tribulation? And it's based on Luke 21, verses 25 to 28. There shall be signs in the sun and in the moon and in the stars, and upon the earth distress of nations with perplexity. The sea and the waves roaring, men's hearts failing them for fear and for looking after those things which are coming on the earth, for the powers of heaven shall be shaken. And then shall they see the Son of Man coming in a cloud with power and great glory. And when those things begin to come to pass, then look up and lift up your heads, for your redemption draweth nigh. So the answer that you got is C. The sun, moon, and stars will be darkened. And there's a few other things in there, of course, too. Okay, but look at B. Okay, the world will experience a nuclear winter. Okay, why do I have that one in there? And so, what is a nuclear winter? We gave a little description of that from the Wikipedia. Nuclear winter is a severe and prolonged global climatic cooling effect hypothesized to occur after widespread firestorms following a nuclear war. Hypothesis based on the fact that such fires can impact soot or can inject soot into the stratosphere where it can block some direct sunlight from reaching the surface of the earth. It is speculated that the resulting cooling would lead to widespread crop failure and famine. Why do we even put that in there? Why do we make note of that? Is this something that's realistic? We've experienced something like this. I think when Mount Pinatubo erupted, I think I was seeing recently, I was checking out this idea, the temperature of the earth went down by a full degree. Climate change can change on a dime, it would seem. Well, the reason I put this in here is because the world is not going to end any of the natural ways that we might be afraid of. Okay, so when all the climate change hysteria has gone out there, I've had to point out, look, don't worry about climate change. We're not, if the world is going to go through such climate change that in 100 years we're going to be 1.4 degrees cooler, and that's going to change all kinds of things, guess what? In 100 years, nobody's going to be here. The climate's going to change all right. Jesus Christ is going to be here before then. And even if it's not in 100 years, the Bible does not tell us that it's going to end in climate change. Climate change is not the thing to worry about. Okay, it's not going to be a nuclear holocaust. It's not going to be climate change. It's not going to be a space invasion. You do not have to look for a natural explanation for how the world is going to end. Okay. And that's what... That is what B is suggesting. Okay, A, the world will not choose to get closer to God. It will be in perplexity, we read, over what they're witnessing. And this is very true even now. People are troubled by all kinds of crime and social breakdown. They're all perplexed, but you know what? They're not getting more spiritually enlightened. No. They won't even begin to think of the real cause. The loss of faith and responsibility before God. Okay, defunding the police, bail reform. Okay, the people are picking the wrong things to try to address in our society. What you want to address is people not going to church and people not recognizing God. It's not people needing to have more law and order, they need more God. More law, you can make more laws, and lawbreakers will break those also. Somebody has pointed out that we don't need new gun laws. The ones that are on the books are not being enforced as it is to begin with. Enforce those first and then see what happens. But that's not the problem. The problem is not that. And in the time of the sun and moon and stars and the signs and the stars that are going to come, people, what they're going to do is they're going to be perplexed by it, meaning, in other words, they won't stop to think about, hey, maybe God is at work here. Okay, for C, the sun, moon, and stars will be darkened. The effect of God's judgment will be felt all over the world as described by the condition of the sun, moon, and stars. It's not going to be just local here in America, local in Africa, local in the Ukraine. What are some other hot spots in the world? Okay, it's not going to be in South America. It's going to be worldwide. Okay, question 801. Our last question. What will accompany Jesus when he arrives in the second coming? And it's based on Matthew 24:31. He shall send his angels with a great sound of a trumpet, and they shall gather together his elect from the four winds, from one end of the heaven to the other. The answer is? It is A, angels with the sound of a trumpet gathering his elect. Okay, B, the Antichrist and Jesus reaching a compromise to rule the world? No, it's not going to end that way. Although God has worked in spite of sin in the world, it's not because he's compromised with man or Satan. Okay, this time period, this tribulation, marks the ultimate failure of Satan to set up the Antichrist. So there's not going to be any sharing of power. Okay, for C, the world will happily elect Jesus to take over. Well, we generally point out that man has nothing to do with creating a kingdom, as in the amillennials. So Jesus can come down to take his throne that we prepared for him. Even less than that, the time of man trying to elect a government that can work is completely over. Man's not going to have anything to do with electing Jesus. Like, what would happen if they voted no? Okay, Christ is going to take over anyhow. When Jesus comes, it's not going to be elected. It's going to be to conquer the world after man has proven himself in need of the Savior and completely incapable of salvation, whether individually or collectively. Okay, A, the elect here refers to Israel being gathered at the end of the tribulation. And the kingdom that Jesus is setting up in the millennium is not only for the purpose of being universal, but also to fulfill God's promise of grace to Israel. And so that's something to keep in mind, that God has set them up as a people, and he's going to be gracious. They are going to get treated special in the millennium. Okay. Okay, any other thoughts anybody wants to share? Any questions? Ms. Wilma.
The Catholic Church says God's forsaken the Jews. He's chosen the Roman Catholics.
I missed the list. He's chosen
the Roman Catholics.
Okay, Wilma says that the Catholic Church says that God has forsaken the Jews and he's chosen the Roman Catholics.
That's what the Catholic told me.
Okay, yeah, somebody who's Catholic. Yeah, that's one of the many there. That is one of the notions that's out there.